Hello and welcome back. In this video I wanted to begin to start talking about CSS. Now CSS is a pretty big topic in itself, so I'm going to start slow and just introduce it early in the course, and I'll introduce it in a way that you'll just get the basic usage. There's a lot of really advanced ways to use CSS and how to apply CSS. I don't want to confuse anybody and go over the top with it, so we'll start really basic. So what is CSS? That's the first question. Well, when we did the history of the web video back in the late 80s, as I mentioned, this was mostly HTML, I should say, was mostly a tool for scientific use. As time went on in the 90s, the limitations of HTML started to become apparent. And I shouldn't say limitations in that you couldn't do stuff. It was that when you could, it was really sloppy and it was hard to maintain, and it grew out of size very quickly, and people would come up with various ways to try to manage it. And so somebody took a step back and said, hey, we need to make a new addition to HTML that'll help solve a lot of these problems. So that's where CSS comes from. Now, what is CSS exactly? CSS stands for cascading style sheets, and that'll probably make very little sense to a lot of people. So don't get too caught up in the name just yet. Just like HTML stands for hypertext markup language, a lot of times in the name, as time goes on, it kind of loses context of the original meaning, and you just kind of know it as HTML or CSS, and then in your mind you know what it is. So let's start off. We learned in HTML a lot of tags, so let's go through some of these tags and it'll make a little more sense why CSS came about. So one of the tags we learned about was the paragraph tag. And one of the tags we learned about was the bold tag. So, when you look on the right hand side in the split view, the design view, over here I've got my two sentences. This is a paragraph and this is a bold sentence. What can you notice about that? Well, if I'm just reading a web page, I can't really easily tell that the first sentence is a paragraph. It's part of a paragraph tag. The second sentence, I can definitely tell that the bold tag has been applied. So what we kind of can do is step back and say, really, there's two kinds of HTML. There's what's known as structure and what's known as presentation. So structure, what does structure mean? Let's go through some examples and maybe it'll become a little more clear. Structure is a paragraph. Structure means that it has some inherent meaning to it, but you won't see that meaning in the final output. So a paragraph, you mark something as a paragraph, and that in itself isn't going to really do much when you load up the web page. Another example would be the headline tags. You're saying something's a headline and you're not really saying much else about it. In HTML, what'll happen is the headline will change in size, but that's not really what you're saying. So presentation would be good examples are bold, italics. We didn't really go over this tag, but there's another one that's called font, and I didn't go over it for a reason, because it's not really used anymore. And I shouldn't say that. People still use it. It's just considered in better practice to use CSS for the same thing. So we can say font color equals red. So the font tag would be another example of presentation. So I hope that the distinction makes sense. Let me go ahead and add another example here of a structure. So this one you'll see a lot. This is called the div tag, and this one's definitely structure. It's just a very generic form of structure, and that's why people use it so often. You're just saying I'm marking this as a dividing piece of text. So in the same way a paragraph is a dividing piece of text, the div tag is much more generic. You're not necessarily saying something's a paragraph. You might be saying it's an entire story. It may be used like a headline. There's a lot of flexibility in that. So those are some examples. So now let's hop over to CSS. What does CSS in general plan to do? Well, and don't hold this true for all cases because there's always exceptions, but in general, when you're using CSS, you're using it for presentation. And I guess I should also note that one of the things that we learned was alignment, and that would be under presentation as well. So anything that visually modifies the output of what you see, that's kind of considered presentation. So let's hop into CSS now. Let's get rid of some of these. Actually, we'll leave the bold sentence here, and let's work in the div here because that's very common to see divs, and I want you guys to get used to seeing them. So let's just have sentence 1, sentence 2. Okay, so this is the most basic usage of CSS. Like I said, there's much more, I don't know if I'd say advanced. There's just a lot of ways to apply CSS, and I'm just going to present one way right now, and then as we go later in the course we'll learn other ways. I don't want to confuse anybody and have a long quiz on all the different ways to apply CSS. So I'll show you the quickest and easiest to apply way. So there's an attribute called style, and then we do equal sign and quotes, and so once anything we put in here is a CSS style. So there's within CSS there is a property called font weight. And so now we can see, if we look at sentence 1 and 2, they look exactly the same. So what's the difference? Well, in sentence 1 we have our structure. It's inside a div, and then within that we've applied presentation. We've applied the style. We have font weight is bold. And there's a lot of CSS properties available. There's dozens at least, maybe possibly over 100. So I'll go through maybe the most common 10 or 15, and then we'll start looking into how to look these up, because there's just so many, you're never going to memorize them all, and using maybe Dreamweaver a little bit to assist you in finding those a little bit faster. So I'm going to stop the video now. So that's just a basic introduction. What I want you to kind of summarize in your mind from this video is structure and presentation, and what HTML as it stands today, not HTML back in the 80s and early 90s, but as it stands today, that in general when you're using HTML, the HTML portion is about the structure, and when you're using CSS, it's about the presentation. I'll go into these topics deeper in later videos.